On this episode of Doing the Most, we are building a Keezer.
Homemade brews and various howtos, everything from meat to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
Excuse my surroundings, we are out here in the Doing the Most garage slash workshop because I wanted to use my brand new Keezer as a little bit of set dressing for this video. A few months ago, New Air reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to do another collaboration. And we talked through some potential projects and they sent me a list of potential products I might want to review. And I really honed in on this deep freeze that they had because it's got built-in temperature control. And when I saw that, I immediately thought, that's something that we could showcase as a Keezer conversion. We talked it through, they said, let's do it. So I want to give a big thank you to New Air for helping facilitate this project build. If you decide after watching this video that you would like to get one of these freezers for yourself, I've got a link in the description that will take you right there. Again, a huge shout out to New Air for being a part of this project. I think you're really going to enjoy what we did. My goal in this video is to ensure that this project feels really accessible and simple. So I'm going to give you a simple step-by-step how-to guide on how to build a collar, as well as hook up your gas and tap system so you can be serving your homebrew cold and right off the tap. So let's do a quick rundown of all the parts necessary to convert a freezer into a Keezer. Of course, you will need a freezer, and you will need a temperature controller if you don't have one built into your freezer. We'll talk about that in a bit. You'll need a collar, which requires lumber, screws, paint or stain, silicone sealant, hinges, and depending on the type of wood and the thickness of your wood, you might also need some insulation to go around the inside of your collar. You'll also need tap assemblies, a manifold, a drip tray, and of course you're going to need lines and disconnects and kegs and a CO2 tank with a regulator, and last but not least, a keg wrench so you can tie everything together. Now I know I labeled this video as a simple Keezer build, and I do believe that it is in fact simple, but I know some of you out there will question the simplicity of this project. But all you need to remember is that you're hooking up a typical kegging system, which is gas into a keg and then liquid out of a keg, but you're doing it inside of a chest freezer. That's it. So obviously you're going to need a freezer, but you're also going to need a collar. The collar allows you a place to put your taps without having to drill holes in your freezer. It also allows you a place to screw in a manifold that will distribute the CO2 amongst multiple kegs from a single CO2 tank. Think of it this way. You've got a CO2 tank which holds your CO2. That goes out through the manifold, which directs your gas to a keg. And then from the outpost on your keg, you have a tap. In this case, instead of using like a picnic tap, we're using a faucet. So what you're doing here is you're using the gas to direct the flow of liquid out of the keg and through your tap. It's literally that simple. And in the New Air freezer, this model I have behind me, temperature control is built in. So I can set the temperature on this particular model above freezing, keeping my kegs cold but not frozen. And I can do that with no added parts. If you don't have temperature control built into your freezer, you're gonna need an additional temperature control unit, and they even make some that require no real electrical wiring. You just plug the freezer into that and it cycles your freezer to keep it above freezing. But we're not going to talk about that in this video because that's not what I did. I used a freezer that specifically had temperature control built in. Another thing that I was really committed to with this build was making sure it was 100% reversible, so no damage of any kind was done to the freezer. Everything could be undone and the freezer could go back to being just a normal deep freeze if I ever chose to go back that route. Another thing I like about this freezer is that it is black. Sometimes it can be hard to find a nice black freezer like this. It just happened to come in this color, which made matching the collar and the taps really easy. And then obviously the black contrasting against all the stainless steel looks really nice. Last thing I liked about this freezer is it's roomy. So I can fit 3 5-gallon kegs and a 20-pound CO2 tank all inside the main area of the freezer. And then on the little shelf here where the compressor is, I can actually fit a 3-gallon keg. And so I've got one of those ordered. And so this last tap here will be dispensing sparkling water. This thing is nice and roomy. When the freezer arrived, it took me a couple weeks to get around to opening it because I was just in a really busy part of my year. But I went ahead and got it unpacked and did a little bit of an inspection on it. There were a couple of dents and dings from shipping, but nothing I was too concerned about. And here you can kind of get an idea for the size. Now, I'm not a woodworker, so you're gonna have to excuse a lot of things, like me not really knowing anything at all about woodworking, as well as some slightly off measurements or maybe a little something that's off kilter here or there. But I think that for my lack of woodworking skills and my real lack of technical skills, that this thing turned out nice and pretty. I had Anna's dad help me cut the wood for the collar because he's much better with power tools than I am. And we cut this just about to match the outer dimensions of the top of the freezer. And then I brought it back home to my messy garage and started screwing everything together. I used a 1-inch drill bit to bore out my holes where my taps are going to go in this collar. Just marked where I was going to drill my holes right in the center of that front board and drilled them out. I chose to sink my screws into the wood so that way I would be able to cover them up with wood filler later and give it just a little bit more of a seamless finish. I made sure to drill pilot holes first so that way I wouldn't crack my wood, and then just screwed everything together. Really the most complicated part of all of this was getting the collar together and getting it to match and look good. Woodworking, again, not my forte. I went around all 4 corners, got everything screwed together and squared, and then took that out for a test drive just to make sure it was going to match and sit level, and everything looked pretty good. So I was ready to move on to the next step. This is just some off-the-shelf, about as cheap as it gets, wood filler, and I just went in and filled any cracks or crevices or blemishes in the wood, made sure to fill over all my screws. That way I could get a nice kind of solid finish on the outside after I sand it all down. The wood filler takes a little bit of time to dry, a few hours. So I went ahead and got it all in and got it smoothed out as best I could, then let it dry, then came back and sanded, and then I went over it again on any other spots that I thought might need to be filled too. Just working my way all the way around, top and bottom, so that way every little blemish was filled in. And then I didn't get any footage of it, but I sanded it nice and smooth so that way I could try and put some polyurethane stain on here. I had really hoped that this color of stain could be sanded down to a nice gray or ebony that really showed off the wood grain, but I just wasn't getting that here. And due to the current global crisis, getting stuff shipped in was going to take a couple of weeks, and I was a little bit impatient about that. So I went with an option that I could find locally. I just ended up not loving the finish. So after roughing it up with a sanding block, I decided to go ahead and just rubberize the whole thing. I used Plasti-Dip spray rubber, and 1 can was enough to coat this entire thing, top and bottom and all across the outside, to give it a nice rubberized finish. Then it was time to get the lid off. I took out the screws from the top of the hinge and then just lifted up the lid and bent it back onto these sawhorses so that way I could work without the lid dangling down off the back of the unit. And I sealed my collar to the top with some waterproofing silicone. And one of the great things about this is that I'll be able to peel it right back off if ever I want to deconvert this freezer, but it provides a nice mold resistant waterproof seal around that edge. So I just lined it with basically that whole tube of sealant, and then steadied up my collar, tried to get everything as exact as I could eyeballing it, and plopped it down gently on, then squared up all my corners, making sure that the back was all the way up against the hinges on the back of the unit. Cleaned up any edges where anything had kind of schlooped out there with just a damp towel. And then I put my lid back on top to provide a little bit of pressure on here, because it takes about 6 hours for the silicone to set. Pop some paint buckets on top, as well as a full keg, and that way I would have plenty of downward pressure setting this thing in place as the silicone set up. And then it was time to drill the holes for my hinges, and I just measured against one of the screws so I know how deep to drill the hole. Don't want to drill all the way through my collar. And put some holes in there, just right into the wooden collar. And for the time being, I popped the covers on so I wouldn't lose them. Now, I'm cutting in here for a minute because it's important to note, I left the existing hinges on the back of the base unit, and those are screwed into the back of the collar to give it some added support. So in addition to the silicone waterproofing that's holding this down, I've got those brackets of the hinges in the back that are also holding it still. I made a little template of the screw hole layout on the back of the lid and used that to mark up this hinge. I got these hinges from the local hardware store. I used this bit to mark the hole where I wanted to drill in the hinge, and then I used a metal bit to drill out the hinge so that way I could hinge the lid to the collar. I repurposed some of the bolts from the original hinge so that way they would fit better here. So there's only 2 at the bottom and then 2 up there at the top. And then I drilled my holes in the collar so that way I could hinge the collar to the lid. Easy peasy, good to go. This here is called a manifold, and I've already got this one assembled. But as you can see, this is the little guy that's going to direct our gas to our kegs. Up here is where the gas line in goes, and then these down here are where the gas comes out and goes to the kegs. And you can individually turn on and off the gas to each keg if you'd like. And it just screws into the back of the collar with this little lip. And again, this is where the gas goes in. This is where the gas comes out. Anytime you've seen the manifold in this video, it's already been assembled, and it's important to note that those little outputs for the gas out, they come in various different sizes, so you can kind of choose whatever size matches the hose that you've got. Inside those is a little tiny plastic washer that maintains an airtight seal on the inside. Do not forget to get some of those or you're going to be real disappointed, because there's a metal on metal connection inside there and gas can leak out from around that. But really setting that plastic washer hard on the inside will help make sure that you don't have any gas leaks. And this is our tap assembly. It involves the faucet, the tap handle, the shank, this little cap for the outside, and this screw-on nut washer combo on the inside, and then of course our beer line hookup with washer. This here in the middle is where your wood collar is going to be. And as you can see, everything just kind of unscrews, and it's very, very simple to assemble. And I'm going to put links to all these things in the description of this video, so you'll have an exact shopping list from what I bought. Some links will be affiliate links and support the channel. Others are just to the outlet where I bought this stuff, so you can get a matching set if you'd like. So basically, you just thread your shank through your collar and screw that washer nut on the back, and then screw your faucet on the front. I went ahead and put all 4 of my faucets in and then tightened them up. This here's a little multi-purpose keg wrench. It slides right into the notch there and allows you to tighten the faucets on the outside. So everything is nice and tight and straight. And then we got to put in our manifold. So I roughly marked the middle of the inside of the collar, made some notches where I wanted to put my screws. Not very exacting here, no big deal. Drilled my holes and screwed my manifold in. Super, super easy, super, super basic. Put the hookups for the beer lines on there and tightened those up with my keg wrench. And then started trying to fit everything inside. I knew I could get 3 kegs in the CO2 tank in here. I also ended up buying a 3-gallon keg that'll go on the shelf on the side. So 4 taps total. Hooked up my gas line and checked my valves. Excellent. And it's starting to come together. Looking pretty good at this point. Just some lines to put in. So I went back to my brew space and got some of my extra hose and assembled all the keg lines. These gray disconnects here are the ones for the gas in line on the ball lock kegs. So I got all those put together just with some hose clamps, which only took a few minutes. And each of those lines is about 24 inches long. Then I took all that back out to the garage and hooked them all up to my manifold, again with some more hose clamps. So everything's clamped down nice and tight, nothing's moving, everything is sealed super, super well. And these just screw on with a little flathead screwdriver. So easy assembly, again. Everything just kind of snaps together. It's not as intimidating as it looks if you just like catch a peek inside somebody's Keezer or Kegerator. It's all real simple stuff. I assembled some beer lines. Those use the black disconnects for the ball lock kegs. And I connected all of those to the taps. Simple, simple. And then started checking everything, making sure I didn't have any leaks or hisses. If you really are a belt and suspenders type of person, you can spray this all down with some soapy water and check for bubbles. That'll tell you if you've got gas leaks anywhere. And then I did some test pours, and these kegs were kind of shaken up, so I'm not surprised that they poured heavy foam. No big deal. I dialed back my pressure a little bit, and we're pouring a little bit better. But obviously the Keezer needed to cool down so I could get an accurate idea of where I was at on all of that. One thing I didn't get to show you in the main video there, because actually the parts just came in today, is how I set up my drip tray. In my continuing commitment to not putting any extra holes or any extra cuts in this thing, I connected my drip tray by using magnets. I've got rare earth magnets across the top in this nice little array up here, and then underneath the drip tray I actually used some welding corner magnets. I saw this online, this wasn't my idea, and those help support the tray from underneath. So this tray can actually hold a full pint glass, no problem, just by use of these magnets. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed doing this project. I really do want to thank New Air for the support of this project and throwing their full weight behind believing in me to pull this off and to do a really simple how-to on how to construct one of these things that makes it really accessible for somebody who might be intimidated by a project like this. I also want to throw a big shout out to Rob. Rob, who is an admin on my Discord, as well as just an incredible supporter of the channel and of Mead Stampede, sent me the shopping list for all the parts that needed to go inside this. So without Rob, this project also would not have happened. This one's for you, buddy. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that bell. We've got lots of homebrewing content here on the channel. And of course, you can follow us on all the social medias that we're on, or join our Discord server. A whole list of them will be right here. Until next time, happy brewing, stay safe, and cheers.